Thank you, Nadim. My question is, why was the Malay language chosen for the religion of Islam in this region compared to like the Javanese language was a lot richer at its time when the Malay language was, I guess, at its original form? Can you elaborate on that?
Surely. Thank you for that question. Well, first, where Islamization of a language is concerned, according to Professor Muhiyuddin Al-Attas again, the first language that underwent this process was the Arabic language in itself. When the Quran was revealed, certain terms which were in use amongst the Arabs were not respecting of the proper meanings as it is intended in the Quran. For example, the term Allah may have been used by the Arabs, but yet this term has added to it certain meanings which are not true to the metaphysical meaning of the word God. There are other terms, for example, that has also taken on false notions and false meanings, like the term karam, yes, which means to be noble. Amongst the Arabs, nobility at that time has been corrupted in terms of its meaning to reflect the ethical, or rather the moral practices of the time, which includes, of course, the corrupt elements of patriarchy. So when the Quran was revealed, such terms would then be emptied of its false meanings and reattached of its true and proper meanings. The term karam, as we said just now, nobility, what the Quran did was to say that, for example, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Indeed, the most noble amongst you is the one who is most God-fearing, thereby giving a meaning to nobility, tying it to the attribute or the virtue of fearing God. And furthermore, with the word Allah just now, which although carried some meanings which were true as the Quran would validate. For example, amongst the Arabs, they affirm that God was the ultimate creator of the world. Because the Quran in various places said that if you were to ask them who created all this, they would say, La yaqulunna Allah, they would say Allah. And further, the Quran also affirms of the Arabs that in the most desperate times, they will be calling Allah. So that means to say there are some true elements of their belief in God, but yet they have added the elements of shirk to the name Allah, because they said that God has, shall we say that in worshipping God, there are other deities which serve as intermediaries. And now the Quran would empty it of these elements. But the process of Islamization of a language is not purely negative in that sense, because there are also additional elements. Because there are, for example, attributes of God that were perhaps not known to the Arabs, that is added in the Quran. Yes? There are attributes of God and the reality of the afterlife and meanings of the word dunya, and there is, shall we say, a real strong shift of meaning as a result of the revelation of the Quran upon the Arabs as well as the Arabic language in that sense. So the Arabic language, shall we say, before the Quran was already rich with meanings. It was already capable of reflecting certain deep recesses of the soul in expressions of love, especially to one's camel, to one's, that means to say they have written elaborately using multiplicity of vocabulary that they then possess, which was developed to the highest degree using human limitations. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the creator of all languages, is able and capable to lift it even higher in that sense. It was threatened to be on the brink of dissolution when languages or when central meanings are used in a free manner, when they no longer reflect a proper reality of the word, when people can use a word to mean the very opposite of it, and so on. So what the Quran does is that it secures the foundation of the meanings of the Quran on secure metaphysical foundation. So therefore the first language that was Islamized is the Quranic language, and that, or Arabic, which comes from the Quran. That language, which has then been Islamized as a result of revelation, and which is the verbatim word of God, became therefore the standard of a language through which other languages becomes Islamized. So, other languages which have been Islamized include, for example, Urdu, yes, as used by the Indians and the Pakistanis today. You have Turkish, yes, the Ottoman Turkish. You have Farsi. These are all languages which, after having been Islamized, reflects a new reality now. So the Malay language is also another, shall we say, subset of the Islamic language. It is a language that, although contains traces of resemblance with the language that was previously used by the Malay peoples, have now been promoted, have now been lifted to such an extent that there are real characteristic differences, qualitative differences from the initial language. In particular, how the Malay language was Islamized, as Professor Al-Attas has written, as well as elaborated upon by his student Professor Wan Muhammad Noor, includes the fact that some central terms from the Quranic Arabic were sprinkled, shall we say, onto the language that becomes, shall we say, semantic keys. Yes, semantic meaning. It becomes grounding concepts through which other concepts are understood. Yes, the Malay term for example, the Arabic term Allah, Dunya, Akhirah, these are all Arabic terms which become absorbed into the language. But the absorption of these terms came with the proper meanings underneath them, such that it would revolutionize even the other terms which were originally Malay, but now given new meanings, emptied of false meanings, such that it becomes now a proper language which has been, shall we say, cleansed and more now subtle, pellucid, in that it now possesses the attributes of reflecting reality. It becomes more scientific in nature. Supposing now your question is, why was the Malay language chosen rather than the Javanese language? Well, we understand that the Javanese language was relatively more developed than the Malay language at that time, owing to the fact that Majapahit at least was using the language for court purposes. We know of the existence of a number of Hindu, Buddhist texts which were in Javanese, as well as local people who have used the language primarily for aesthetic purposes, primarily for, shall we say, literary purposes, writing as they did for the shall we say, the higher and upper class of the strata of society and community. But this language is more aesthetic in nature rather than scientific, because the purpose is for literary writings, and as such, also the language is saturated with certain metaphysical commitments. Yes, that means to say of a previous worldview, which are mythological in nature, animistic in nature, shall we say, such that to empty it of those mythological meanings would be more difficult, would require even more radical moves, shall we say. Like, for example, what happened with the Greek language and its impact upon Christianity. Yes, we know that of the most extant Bibles around, perhaps the findings by the archaeologists have now changed and overturned this conclusion. But at least earlier on, they were of the opinion that the most extant copies of the Bibles, that means to say the longest of them and the most influential in the foundation of Western culture and civilization, were the Bibles written in Greek. But Greek language contained the, shall we say, the baggages of a mythological worldview. Remember that it was used by the poets before the philosophers. When it was used by Homer, for example, to write and pen down the Iliad, it was filled with mythological characters such as Zeus and so on. And these mythological characters will affect the central concepts such as God. Yes? When you mythologize the meaning, when you mythologize a language, or when a language is saturated with these terms, the term God, for example, will have a gender relation. Either the God, it's a god or a goddess. It will take on plurals. You will have gods. Because in the pantheon, in Mount Olympus, that is how the gods were described. So with these baggages, when the same language is now being employed to translate what is of the Hebraic family, what is of the Semitic language, certain meanings which were perhaps not found in the original sense of the language would now become smuggled in the new language. For example, the term son of God or children of God in the Hebraic sense, in the Arabic sense of the word, does not carry metaphysical connotation, merely a means, a term of endearment and preference. For example, in the Quran, we find that the Banu Israel says that Nahnu abna'illah, we are the children of God, but they don't mean by that in the metaphysical sense. They mean by that in the preferred sense of the word. But if you translate it into a language in which as it is understood, carried those mythological significations, you will then have to do an extra work of explaining that there is now a radical break. Yes? So that means to say, if they were to have chosen Javanese in this part of the world, the challenges would become tremendous. It would be too elaborate, and it would take so much of their energy in Islamizing the language. But if they were to choose a relatively undeveloped language like Malay, and not solely to the fact that it is relatively undeveloped, but precisely because the language and its shall we say, its grammatical properties is such that it is capable of the concept of secondarity. Yes? Do you know this term, secondarity? Some languages, due to its elaborate grammatical structure, are only suitable to become a primary language, in which you cannot have an external language, a foreign language, leaving its traces on you, without while you maintaining your initial characteristic. But certain languages, such as the Malay language, possesses the attribute of elasticity. It is capable of absorbing various linguistic universes into its structure. Yes, so it is a perfect secondary language. Secondarity is the shall we say, the linguistic characteristic of the Malay language. Due to this suitability of being of secondarity, it is capable of absorbing the Arabic linguistic discourse or Arabic linguistic universe, and it is also capable of being absorbed within the English linguistic universe. That is why you will notice, if you were to read books written by somebody in the 20th, 21st century and read a book written in the 19th and 18th century, you will notice stark differences in the syntax sense of the word, yes, in the grammatical orderings, yes, for example, in the subject predicate, in the arrangement of sentences. All these will bear marked differences. Yes, so secondarity now, in our sense, secondarity in this sense is now it is now being kidnapped, shall we say, to use a more violent metaphor, to do the work of midwifery. Yes, so the Malay language has been kidnapped to do the work of midwifery, to deliver the babies of European languages, of their worldview, of their understanding of reality, of their understanding of morality, and so on. Whereas previously, the secondarity in the Malay sense of the word was to perform the Islamic duty of conveying reality and truth as the Quran conveyed it. So that's why when you read of the various trends the various trends of writings in the Malay language, according to Prof. Al-Attas, there is the Barus strand. This is the Hamzah Fansuri strand, which is the shall we say, the original source of the modern writings in the Malay language. There is also the Abdullah Munshi strand of the Sejarah Melayu type that tries to mimic the writings of the Javanese and the court writings of that time. Yes, so yes, please forgive me. I really enjoy abstract discussions of this nature. Yes, thank you.